December 1944. The snow fell thick and silent over the Ardennes forest, blanketing the Belgian countryside in a deceptive white peace. But beneath that frozen silence, hell was about to unfold. Hitler was preparing his final gamble in the West, a massive offensive that would become known as the Battle of the Bulge, the largest and bloodiest single battle fought by American forces in World War II. At the center of this maelstrom stood a small Belgian town called Bastogne, a crossroads of 7 major highways, unremarkable in peacetime, but absolutely critical in war. Whoever controlled Bastogne controlled the Ardennes. And in the desperate winter of 1944, the 101st Airborne Division would be called upon to hold this vital junction against overwhelming odds. Outnumbered, surrounded, freezing, and running low on ammunition, the Screaming Eagles would face the full fury of Germany's most feared divisions, elite Panzer and Waffen SS units that had crushed resistance across Europe. For 7 days, the paratroopers would stand alone, fighting off relentless attacks while waiting for relief that seemed would never come. This is the story of extraordinary courage in the face of annihilation. The story of how America's finest airborne division refused to surrender even when defeat seemed certain. And the story of how General George S. Patton, Jr. achieved the impossible, pivoting an entire army through a blizzard to break the siege and save Bastogne from destruction. So let us enter the frozen hell of the Ardennes and witness why the defense of Bastogne and Patton's legendary relief operation remain among the greatest feats of arms in military history. By autumn 1944, Nazi Germany was reeling. Allied forces had liberated Paris and were pushing toward the German border. In the east, the Soviet juggernaut was rolling westward. The Third Reich was being squeezed in a vice that seemed destined to crush it. But Adolf Hitler was not ready to accept defeat. In September 1944, he conceived one final desperate offensive. He would strike through the Ardennes forest, the same route used in 1940, and drive to Antwerp, splitting the Allied armies and forcing a negotiated peace. The plan was called Wacht am Rhein, Watch on the Rhine, designed to deceive Allied intelligence. Hitler assembled massive forces, 3 armies comprising nearly 30 divisions, over 400,000 men, 1,400 tanks, and 4,000 artillery pieces. It would be Germany's last strategic reserve. The German High Command was deeply skeptical. Field Marshal von Rundstedt called it this stupid operation. But Hitler was adamant. The attack would go forward. Hitler chose the Ardennes because the heavily forested terrain was considered impassable for large-scale armored operations. The Allies had thinly garrisoned this sector with green divisions or exhausted units resting after heavy combat. The offensive was scheduled for December 16, 1944. The Germans assembled in complete secrecy, moving at night and maintaining radio silence. Weather forecasts predicted heavy fog, perfect to neutralize Allied air superiority. In the pre-dawn darkness of December 16th, at exactly 5:30 a.m., the silence shattered. Over 1,600 German artillery pieces opened fire simultaneously along the entire front. Hitler's desperate gamble had begun. When the German offensive exploded on December 16th, the 101st Airborne Division was nowhere near the fighting. The Screaming Eagles were in Camp Mormelin, France, enjoying well-deserved rest after 72 brutal days in Holland during Market Garden. But on December 17th, urgent orders arrived. The German breakthrough was far more serious than believed. Every available unit was needed immediately. The 101st and 82nd Airborne were ordered to move at once. The men scrambled to get ready. Officers were recalled from Paris. Equipment was drawn hastily. There wasn't time to gather proper winter clothing or full ammunition loads. They would make do with what they could grab. At 8 p.m. on December 17th, the first trucks rolled out. It was a miserable journey. The trucks had no heaters, many had no covers. Men huddled against the bitter cold as the convoy crawled toward Belgium. Snow began to fall. Originally headed for Werbemont, the convoy was redirected at dawn on December 18th. Bastogne was now the critical point. If the Germans captured it, the entire Allied position would collapse. The lead elements began arriving in Bastogne around 11 p.m. on December 18th. The town was already in chaos. Refugees streamed through streets. American units that had been overrun fell back in disorder. Artillery fire was clearly audible to the east. General Anthony McAuliffe, acting division commander, quickly established headquarters. He met with General Troy Middleton of 8th Corps, who briefed him on the dire situation. At least 3 German divisions were converging on Bastogne. McAuliffe asked the critical question, "How long do we need to hold?" Middleton's answer was honest but not reassuring. "I don't know, as long as you can. The whole front depends on it." The 101st had arrived with limited ammunition, no winter clothing, and incomplete intelligence about enemy positions. They had no time to dig in properly, and they were about to face some of the most powerful units in the German army. As the last elements filed into Bastogne during the early hours of December 19th, German artillery grew closer. The men took up positions around the perimeter. They had arrived just in time. Within hours, German armored divisions would reach the outskirts. The battle for the crossroads was about to begin. The German plan was straightforward. Bypass Bastogne quickly if possible. Surround it if necessary, but don't let it slow the advance. Speed was everything. But Hunte Houses Hautenfata and Houses on Bastogne would be dangerous. He ordered the 26th Volksgrenadier Division, Panzerlehr, and elements of 2nd Panzer Division to contain Bastogne. The first major engagement came at Noville, 3 miles northeast of Bastogne, on December 19, 1944. Team Desaubry of the 10th Armored Division, reinforced by the 5/6th Paratrooper Infantry, held the village against repeated attacks throughout the day. The fighting was savage, with German tanks grinding through village streets while paratroopers fired from houses. Major William Desaubry was severely wounded. By late afternoon, with German armor threatening to cut them off, the survivors withdrew to Bastogne, fighting through German positions and leaving behind destroyed vehicles and dead comrades. To the east, at Neffy and Bizery, the 501st Parachute Infantry clashed with Panzerlehr in confused fighting amid fog and snow. Bazookas knocked out German tanks at point-blank range. German infantry in winter camouflage infiltrated American positions. On the southeastern approaches, Team O'Hara and the 327th Glider Infantry established blocking positions near Marvy and Warden. These positions would absorb repeated attacks in the days ahead. By December 20th, German forces had nearly completed their encirclement. The 26th Volksgrenadier Division attacked from the east and northeast. Panzerlehr pressed from the southeast. Elements of 2nd Panzer applied pressure from the north. General McAuliffe faced a critical decision. His forces were stretched thin around a perimeter roughly 7 miles in diameter. He had approximately 18,000 men facing at least 45,000 Germans with substantial armor. The Americans had advantages. Interior lines, well-trained troops, excellent leadership. But they also faced severe disadvantages. Limited ammunition, no winter clothing, dwindling medical supplies, and no way to be resupplied once the ring closed. On the night of December 20th, that ring closed completely. German forces cut the last road southwest from Bastogne. The 101st Airborne and all forces in Bastogne were now completely surrounded. The siege had begun. The realization of being surrounded actually simplified matters, as McAuliffe later quipped. Now we don't have to worry about protecting our flanks. We're surrounded, so we can shoot in any direction. But the situation was objectively desperate. Ammunition for only a few more days. Artillery shells rationed to...
December 21st dawned cold and gray. The fog helped conceal German movements, but also meant no air support and no resupply. The men tightened their belts and prepared for another day of battle. German attacks came in waves, probing for weak points. At Marvy, the 2nd Battalion of the 327th Glider Infantry beat back repeated assaults by Panzerlehr. German tanks approached supported by infantry in white camouflage, but were driven back by artillery and determined resistance. One glider infantryman described the terror. You'd hear the tanks before you saw them, that grinding, clanking sound. Then they'd come out of the fog, these huge shapes. Our bazookas would fire, sometimes hit, sometimes miss. The noise was incredible. Tanks, machine guns, artillery, men screaming. And the cold. God, the cold was as much an enemy as the Germans. To the northeast, near Foy and Bizori, the 506th Parachute Infantry held against attacks from the 26th Volksgrenadier. The western perimeter, held by the 502nd, remained relatively quiet. Throughout December 21st and 22nd, defenders faced not just enemy attacks, but brutal winter conditions. Temperatures plunged well below freezing. Many lacked proper winter clothing. Frostbite appeared among the troops. Men stood in frozen foxholes, stamping feet and blowing on hands. Food supplies dwindled. The 101st had arrived with minimal rations. Portions were cut in half, then again. Hungry soldiers scavenged abandoned houses. One memorable find was a farmer's potato cellar. The potatoes became a feast for men subsisting on cold sea rations. Ammunition was even more critical. Artillery batteries, firing hundreds of rounds daily, were now limited to 10 rounds per gun per day. Colonel Thomas Sherburne rationed shells with agonizing care. Every fire mission had to count. Medical supplies were critically short. Bandage stations overflowed with wounded. Morphine was running out. Bandages were reused. Surgeons worked around the clock by flashlight, performing operations with minimal supplies. Major Douglas Davidson later describes conditions. We had wounded men on every surface, floors, tables, stretchers. We did battlefield surgery with minimal supplies. I performed amputations without anesthesia because we'd run out of morphine. The men bore it with incredible courage, but the screams, you never forget those screams. Despite hardships, morale remained remarkably high. The men trusted McAuliffe, who frequently visited frontline positions. They trusted their commanders, most combat veterans who led from the front. The paratroopers took grim satisfaction in casualties they inflicted. Every attack was beaten back. Every German tank risked destruction by bazookas. The snow around Bastogne was littered with destroyed vehicles and frozen enemy bodies. One critical factor was excellent artillery support. Despite ammunition rationing, American gunners were devastatingly accurate. They had pre-registered every likely avenue of approach. When Germans massed for attack, American artillery caught them in the open. Colonel Sherburne developed TOT missions, where shells from multiple batteries arrived simultaneously, giving the enemy no time for cover. These coordinated barrages broke up numerous attacks before they could reach American lines. On December 22nd, weather remained overcast and foggy. No aircraft could fly. Defenders looked anxiously at gray skies, knowing that above those clouds were hundreds of American planes, grounded, unable to help. One more day without resupply, one more day without air support. And then, on the morning of December 22nd, something happened that would become legend. At 11:30 a.m. on December 22nd, 4 German soldiers approached American lines near Remifoss, carrying a white flag. They were parlementaires, officers requesting parley under flag of truce. The Germans were stopped by Company F, 327th Glider Infantry. Among them was Private First Class Ernest Primetz, who spoke German. The German captain announced formally, "We are parlementaires." The Americans blindfolded the officers and escorted them through the chain of command. Word reached General McAuliffe. The Germans had brought a formal demand for surrender. The message read, "To the USA commander of the encircled town of Bastogne, the fortune of war is changing. This time, the USA forces in and near Bastogne have been encircled by strong armored units. There is only one possibility to save the encircled USA troops from total annihilation. That is the honorable surrender of the encircled town. If this proposal should be rejected, 1 German artillery corps and 6 heavy AA battalions are ready to annihilate the USA troops." McAuliffe read it, snorted, and tossed it aside. His initial response consisted of a single word: "Ow, nuts." His staff reminded him the Germans needed a formal reply. Lieutenant Colonel Harry Kennard suggested, "That first crack you made would be hard to beat, General." McAuliffe looked puzzled. "What did I say?" "You said, nuts." McAuliffe grinned. "That's it then." He wrote, "To the German commander, nuts, the American commander." Colonel Harper delivered the message to the German officers. The German captain read it, confused. What does this mean? Is the reply negative or affirmative? Harper replied with glee. The reply is decidedly not affirmative. If you don't understand what nuts means in plain English, it is the same as go to hell. And I'll tell you something else. If you continue to attack, we will kill every goddamn German that tries to break into this city. The German major clicked his heels. We will kill many Americans. This is war. Harper's response was blunt. On your way, bud, and good luck to you. McAuliffe's single-word reply became instantly famous. When the men heard about it, they cheered. The story spread rapidly, boosting morale enormously. The defenders weren't just holding on, they were thumbing their noses at the Germans. But words alone wouldn't hold Bastogne. The defenders still faced overwhelming forces, dwindling supplies, and bitter cold. What they needed was a miracle. They needed the weather to clear and relief to arrive. Unknown to the men in their foxholes, that relief was already on its way. 90 miles south, an American army was pivoting north in a race against time. And leading that army was General George S. Patton. Patton's impossible task. When the German offensive exploded on December 16th, Patton was 150 miles south, commanding 3rd Army in its drive toward the Saar. His forces were actively engaged in offensive operations. On December 19th, Eisenhower convened an emergency conference at Verdun to address the crisis. Present were Eisenhower, General Bradley, General Devers, and Patton. The mood was grim. German panzers had punched deep into American lines. Eisenhower described the situation and stressed that this was a crisis but also an opportunity. The Germans had come out from behind their defenses. If the Allies could contain and counterattack, they could inflict devastating losses. He wanted to know when his commanders could launch counteroffensives. Patton had been waiting for this moment. Days earlier, he had ordered his staff to prepare contingency plans for a rapid shift northward. When Eisenhower asked when they could counterattack, Patton replied immediately, on December 22nd, with 3 divisions. The room fell silent. What he was proposing was considered impossible. The 3rd Army was engaged 90 miles south. To disengage, turn 90 degrees north, march through the winter weather, and attack in a new direction, all within 48 hours, violated every principle of military logistics. Eisenhower asked skeptically, "Don't be fatuous, George. When can you really start?" Patton leaned forward. The morning of December 22nd, with 3 divisions. The 4th Armored, the 26th Infantry, and the 80th Infantry. They made the decision. "Go ahead, George, but I want your initial attack to head for Bastogne." Patton grinned. "We'll get him out, Ike." What followed was one of the most remarkable feats of military logistics in history. Patton had to disengage 3 divisions from combat, turn them 90 degrees north, move them over 100 miles through Belgian winter weather, and have them ready to attack, all within 72 hours. The scale was staggering. More than 133,000 soldiers had to be moved, more than 11,000 vehicles, thousands of tons of ammunition and supplies, and it all had to be done in the worst possible conditions. Temperatures below freezing, snow and ice on roads, winter storms reducing visibility. But Patton's staff had done their homework. The contingency plans meant unit commanders already knew their routes, objectives, and timetables. Orders went out immediately, and within hours, entire divisions were moving. The 4th Armored Division, commanded by Major General Hugh Gaffey, was Patton's spearhead. This was one of the finest armored divisions in the Army, with a combat record stretching back to Normandy. As divisions disengaged and turned north, Patton personally drove along the columns, stopping to talk to men. He was a master of motivation.
The relief of Bastogne marked a turning point in the Battle of the Bulge. Hitler's last great offensive had been stopped. The German spearheads that had driven west past Bastogne were now in danger of being cut off. Within days, the entire German offensive would collapse. But the cost had been terrible. The 101st Airborne suffered approximately 2,000 casualties during the siege. Patton's Third Army took heavy casualties fighting north. The 4th Armored alone lost over 1,000 men. German casualties were even higher. The forces besieging Bastogne suffered at least 10,000 casualties. Hundreds of tanks were destroyed. And critically, the delay imposed by the defense disrupted the entire German offensive timetable. The defense of Bastogne demonstrated what soldiers can endure when properly led and motivated. The defenders faced cold, hunger, enemy attacks, and isolation. They were surrounded and outnumbered, but they didn't surrender because they believed in their mission, trusted their leaders, and refused to let each other down. Patton's relief operation showcased the critical importance of aggressive leadership and bold action. By any conventional standard, what Patton attempted was reckless, but he understood that audacity and speed could overcome conventional obstacles. Together, the defense and relief of Bastogne changed the course of the Battle of the Bulge and possibly the war. By holding Bastogne, the 101st Airborne disrupted German timetables and forced the enemy to divert forces. By relieving Bastogne, Patton's Third Army signaled that the German offensive had failed. But beyond strategic significance, Bastogne became something more, a symbol of American determination. The surrounded paratroopers responding to a German surrender demand with "nuts" captured the American spirit in a way that resonated far beyond the military context. The men who fought at Bastogne never forgot their experience. Many said it was the defining moment of their lives. They had faced the ultimate test, surrounded, outnumbered, cold, hungry, and they had passed that test. Today, the town of Bastogne honors the American soldiers who saved it with monuments, museums, and annual commemorations. Every December, on the anniversary of the siege, the people of Bastogne hold ceremonies honoring the veterans who defended their town. The frozen crossroads of Bastogne became the place where Hitler's last gamble failed, where American soldiers proved their mettle, and where one of the most dramatic rescues in military history unfolded. The snow that fell on Bastogne in December 1944 has long since melted. The rubble has been cleared, the buildings rebuilt, but the memory remains of paratroopers standing in frozen foxholes, refusing to yield, of tankers grinding through enemy fire to reach surrounded comrades, of a general's defiant one-word reply that became legendary. This was Bastogne, the frozen crossroads where history turned, where heroes were made, and where the American spirit proved unbreakable. Their sacrifice should never be forgotten. Their courage should always be remembered. The hell above and around Bastogne was as real, as deadly, and as significant as any battle in history. And in that frozen hell, American soldiers achieved something extraordinary. They held the line when it mattered most, and in doing so, they helped win the war. This is their story. This is Bastogne. Never forget.